Right. Hello, everyone. So today we are going to talk about the Friedman's approach to permanent income hypothesis. So this is a part of consumption theories. And in this, we have earlier we've talked about that there is a traditional Keynesian consumption function, also called the absolute income hypothesis. And the base of consumption theory is coming from microeconomics from the Fisher's intertemporal choice model. And then we talked about Simon Kuznets, how he found data and he found that empirically, how should the consumption function look like? And then because of this data, so before this, we did Modigliani's life cycle hypothesis and how that tried to fit to the data, tried to fit a theory which also could explain the data. So life cycle hypothesis was one, and it gave a great approach because it also gave certain numbers. It gave a very practical approach which could be used econometrically to find some answers. Another theory was given by Milton Friedman, which was on the permanent income hypothesis. So right now we're going to learn about Friedman's approach of permanent income hypothesis. So the job of Friedman also was to find a consumption function or to find a theory of consumption which could match data. So what is the data? The data was that for a cross section of the population, my MPC was actually less than APC. Okay, but in the long run, my MPC was equal to APC. Okay, so in the short run, MPC is less than MPC. For a cross section of the population, means for some section of the population, MPC is less than APC. But in the long run, MPC is equal to APC. So that was the first kind of result. The second result was that in the short run, MPC is less than APC. And in the long run, so actually this is not to be put here. Let's put this here. So in the long run, MPC is equal to APC. A cross section meaning when you do analysis of different sections of the society, you can get MPC less than APC. In the short run, across time, you can get MPC less than APC. But in the long run, you have to get MPC is equal to APC. So this is what the data is all about. And you need to find a theory which can corroborate to this data. So how did Milton Friedman do it? So Milton Friedman picked up from the life cycle hypothesis was in what Modigliani said. So Modigliani said that consumption is a function of his present value of income. And this present value of income included his income from labor and included income from assets. So you have two types of income what you earn and income what you have, or the assets, income that your assets generate, right? So consumption is a function of this, and then he gave a function of the consumption function, that what type of function it can be. So Milton Friedman also took that as a starting point and said that consumption for an individual I can be a function of his present value of that individual. Okay, that is again the same kind of thing. But he differed from Modigliani with his treatment of PV. So he said that I'm going to define something called a permanent income. Now this is slightly arbitrary. Okay, and this is one of the criticisms also, that how do you really take out the permanent income of an individual? So he said that a permanent income is R, which is a rate of return, rate of return of the present value of that individual, present value of assets. So present value that we had taken out, that Modigliani had taken out. So you add all the incomes across all the years and you take out the present value. That's the meaning of present value, right? Just like in investment, you take the present value of an asset. So an asset has gives some return in year 1, some return in year 2, some return in year 3, and like that till year n. And then you take out the present value of all these income streams, and what you get is the present value of an asset. So similarly, you take out all the income streams of a person over a lifetime, plus all the return of assets from a person over a lifetime, and then you sum it up and you get the present value of the income of an individual. So if you have a certain present value, then that should give you a yearly permanent income. Okay, so that is what he said. So that's why he's multiplying it by the rate of return. So that's where the two are different. Okay, they both use the concept of present value, but Friedman uses it a little differently. So he said that your permanent income, YP, is R, which is a rate of return of into your present value, which present value, like Modigliani said, would include your human capital and it would include your assets. Okay. Now he said that, so this is one point of difference. The other is that both said that an individual would like to have a smooth consumption over his lifetime. Okay. So where Modigliani tried to find a consumption over the lifetime present value, he said that this smooth consumption would mean that there is a permanent level of consumption, which is a fraction K of the permanent level of income for an ith, let's say, individual or an group of individuals. Okay, so he said that let's define a permanent income, which is a certain return over its present value. Let's define a permanent consumption, which is a fraction of your permanent income. Okay, so if you have a certain permanent income, then your permanent consumption is going to be a fraction of that. Okay. So permanent income is the income that you can expect to get year on year on year. So what is a slight definition of permanent income? It's the income. So it is something like, what's your current income plus expected growth rate over your lifetime, something like that. You can take that as permanent income. So that is what we're defining as permanent income, similar to what Modigliani did. He also defined as your expected future income as current income and some multiple of your current income. So same is that your current income and some multiple of your current income is your expected permanent income. Okay, so there are these new terms with which Friedman has introduced: permanent consumption, permanent income, right? So if there is a permanent income, then there has to be something else also, right? So corresponding to that, he said there is a transitory income. and a transitory consumption. So P stands for permanent and T stands for transitory. Okay, so transitory means what the word means, that it is temporary. Okay, it is coming and going. It is not permanent. And permanent is something that you can actually expect to happen year on year. So a lottery, if you earn, or a bonus if you get, that would be part of transitory. And if you get an increment, that would be type of permanent. Okay, so that's how they both differ. So your income has two components, permanent and transitory, and your consumption also has two components, permanent and transitory. Okay, so if you add up people across a certain section of population, you get your consumption will be a fraction of the permanent income of that class. Okay. All right, so I've already talked about that your income is equal to your income in any year. So any single year. So you have a certain permanent income, but your income in any single year will be a permanent income plus transitory income. But this transitory income, your income in any year can be more than your permanent income or less than your permanent income. Okay, so your permanent income is something that you will get every year. Transitory is something that is a short-term measure. Okay, so like I said, your any current year income can be more or less than your permanent income. Similarly, for your consumption in any year can be more or less than your permanent consumption. If you consume more that year, that is temporarily more than your permanent consumption, and if you consume less that year, that would be temporarily less than consumption. So out of this, what is defined? What is defined is permanent income. Permanent income is defined as, like I said, R of your present value. And what is permanent consumption? Permanent consumption is some fraction K of your permanent income. That is which is certain. Okay. Now the rest, YT and CT. So YT and CT are transitory and uncertain. Okay. They are transitory, they are uncertain, they are unpredictable. So Friedman is saying that every year you will have some part of your consumption which will be unpredictable, that will not follow the pattern, and some part of your consumption will be predictable and that can follow a pattern. Okay, so now we're going to talk about more of what did Friedman say about this permanent and this transitory component. It looks very interesting to me because like things like lottery, which are a one-time thing, right? Now you could not deal with them properly in the life cycle hypothesis. Okay, because life cycle hypothesis did not really differentiate between which part of your consumption is income, which part of your consumption is like a bonus, which is a lottery, which is a windfall gain, which is not. It treated income as income, wealth is wealth. So here there is a difference. You can differentiate between what part of your income is, it is stable. Let's call it stable. What part of income is stable? What part of income is unstable? Okay, so that is what we are referring to here. So now, like I said, we are going to talk about a series of assumptions concerning the relationships between permanent and transitory income, permanent and transitory consumption, and transitory income and transitory consumption. Okay, and this is the basis of how of Friedman's the entire analysis. So the first of Friedman's assumption is that there is no correlation between transitory and permanent income. So what do we mean? What do we mean? So there is like I said, your income any year is permanent component and transitory component. It's the addition of both. Now every year your correlation or covariance. Okay, covariance or correlation meaning what is the common factors? What the common factors between permanent income and transitory income is missing. There are no common factors. Okay, what defines this does not define this. They are different. Okay, one is predictable, one is unpredictable. Okay, so there is no correlation. Why does some year have a higher higher income than your permanent income? So like if it's a lottery, then you can't predict it, right? Or if let's say some relative gave you some kind of some income transfer, some chacha tata dada was very happy with you and gave you some income, that cannot be predicted. Or if you get some funds from ISI, you go to ISI and they give you a stipend, you can't really predict it, that okay, will you get it or not? So this is unpredictable. You can't. So there is no correlation between these two, permanent income and transitory income. You cannot measure what will one be if you know the other. So you can't say, okay, if my permanent income is this will be my transitory income. You can't say. There is no correlation. So there will always be like an average, population average. There will be some people who will have a permanent income more than that. There will be people who will have a transitive, there will be an average. Then there will be people who have incomes higher, people who will have incomes lesser. So if there is a permanent income of each income strata, okay, so each income strata has its own permanent income, right? High income, low income, so on. So they have their own permanent income, but within that also there will be some people which will have more that year, some people which will have less that year, some people which will have more income that year, some people which will have less income that year, some people which will have more income that year, some people which will have less income that year. Okay, so whatever is your permanent income is, your individual incomes will differ from that every year, and that is unpredictable. Okay, so that is the first thing. Then Friedman said that there is also no relationship between permanent and transitory consumption. So consumption also permanent and transitory, there is no relation. Your permanent consumption may be very high, transitory consumption could be low. Permanent consumption could be low, transitory consumption could be high. So permanent is, but the difference is that permanent is predictable, transitory is unpredictable. You cannot predict whether this is, what is this? Okay, so this is unpredictable, and again, so something which is not stable. So permanent consumption would be consumption which is stable, predictable. You can predict what's going to happen this year, next year. Transitory income is your what do you call impulse spending, something that you don't really do but just did it once or something like that. So that is your transitory consumption. So your every year yearly income will be it will be different from your permanent income because of the transitory component. So your consumption, actual consumption, can be less than your permanent consumption, or it can be more than your permanent consumption also. Depends on what is transitory consumption this year. Was it less? Was it more? Now, obviously, the one thing that everybody would think of, that maybe the transitory consumption is actually a function of transitory income, right? So your transitory consumption should actually be a function of your transitory income. So maybe that is predictable. We are saying that transitory income is not predictable. So fine. Transitory consumption, is it not predictable? Is it not a function of transitory income? So that is actually the third assumption of, or third result, or third theory of Friedman, that there is no relation between transitory consumption and transitory income. Okay, so this is a little controversial because it seems very logical, but Friedman says that that is not true. So he says that if there is a sudden increase in income because of some transitory fluctuation, this will not. So I think what he means is that it will not. You cannot predict how much of the transitory income he will spend or he will not spend. So if there is some increase in when you cannot predict the behavior, then you say it's not a function, right? That's the definition of being a function. You cannot predict the behavior. Okay, so that's so there could be a year in which you have a positive transitory income, but that year you choose to save because you felt that the business scenario is, or the job scenario is not good and you need to save. Some year you may get a transitory income and you may spend a large part of the transitory income. Okay, or some so that is what he means, that it's not really a function. By not really a function, he's saying that it is not really predictable. Okay, that the year you have a large transitory income, you are going to have a large consumption. It's not really that case. Okay, so that is why he says that it is not a predictable function. So it's not a function. So he says that the covariance of that is also zero. It may be, it may not be also. You can't predict it, so it's not a function. Okay, so now another thing that is very important to Friedman's conclusion will be that since transitory consumption is not correlated with anything, neither with permanent consumption, nor with transitory income, nor with permanent income, meaning that when we take a sample population, okay, and let's say for we divide the population into certain income classes, the transitory part will cancel out. Okay, so he's saying that for a certain income level, income group, some people have positive transitory component, some people will have negative transitory component, some people will have no transitory component. So he's saying on average this will cancel out, and ultimately your consumption will be equal to the permanent consumption only, and transitory component of different individuals so will cancel out, and the transitory component should be taken as zero because it will average out to zero. So your average transitory component will be zero. Okay, so on average, a transitory component will be zero. So he's saying that consumption should only be taken as consumption, permanent consumption, as the transitory parts, some will buy a house, some will sell a house, some will take a loan, some will do this. So average may the transitory component will be zero, and your consumption should actually only be equal to the actual permanent predictable consumption. Now with this, he gets the conclusion that Kuznets had given. So again, going back to Kuznets' conclusions, that your MPC is less than APC for a cross-sectional income study. So across section, higher people had lower MPC, higher income people had lower MPC, and lower income people had higher MPC. Across time, in the short run, MPC was less than APC, but in the long run, MPC is equal to APC. So this is the Kuznets. These were the Kuznets results. So how does Friedman's permanent income hypothesis conform to these empirical results? For that, I'm going to take you to the diagram. Okay, this is the Friedman's consumption function. So the third result, that if MPC is equal to APC, this will obviously hold for the fact that permanent consumption is a fraction of your permanent income. And in the long run, this is that line where this is your income level. This is your income level, this is your permanent income level, this is your consumption level, and your permanent consumption level in the long run is a fraction of your permanent level. So your MPC is constant at whatever is K. Okay, so this is in the long run, this is the straightforward answer. Now, in the short run, how does this hold? So short run, he says that, let's say for a certain income group. So first we're talking about a cross section of the population. For a certain income group, the permanent, or let's say here, let's say you are at point B. For a certain income group, the permanent income is this by P. Okay. Now, one particular year, his income increased to by 1. Okay. But in that year also, so for a certain income level person, a cross section, right? So for a higher level, for a person whose permanent income was usually B, one particular year he had an income level which is A. Okay. Now he has an income level which is A, But Friedman says that income can be A, but your consumption is only permanent because transitory consumption cancels out for different groups of people. So this YP stand for one group of people, let's say group B, whose income average is YP. So for this group of people, let's say this year the average income is more than that. It is equal to by A. This year, the average income for this group of people, on average, when you add everyone's, some will have a transitory component positive, some will have a transitory component negative. On average, their income is higher this particular year. But their consumption will be equal to, according to the permanent consumption. Their consumption level, again, because his thing is that your transitory, on average, the transitory part should sum up to zero. If it's a normal distribution, on average, the transitory component should sum up to zero. So then what he said is that in a particular year, if this is your permanent income and permanent consumption, in a particular year, your income can increase to here, but your consumption will stay the same. It will be according to your permanent consumption pattern only, because on average, the transitory components of people will cancel out. So you can shift from point B to point A temporarily in the short run. Then another, he said that this, let's say this section of population whose regular permanent income is C, but this particular year they had a lower permanent income. So it is, they moved to a lower income, but their consumption will be still according to their permanent income. So it will just be a transfer from point C to point B. So that is why this across section consumption function in a particular year can look like this, which is like the Keynesian consumption function, which has this positive slope where MPC is less than MPC is less than APC. I'm sure you will ask the question that now this curve can look like this also. What if the people whose permanent income is this in 1 year faced an actual income which is lesser than that? And what if the people whose permanent income is this 1 year face an actual income which is lesser than this? Then you will have a different value of K. So which will be more than one. You're spending more than what you're earning. So how is that possible? So so Friedman had actually said that you will find that this is the general pattern, that if a person belongs to a high income strata, then there are much higher chances of him having an income which is higher on average than his permanent income. And when a person belongs to a lower income group, so this is for cross-sectional studies, right? So when a person belongs to a lower income group, then the chances that his income in a particular year is lesser than his permanent income is higher than the chances that on average this income has a higher income than the group. So that is what Milton Friedman said in response to that criticism. And so this is what a cross-section study of Milton Friedman's permanent income hypothesis looks like, that there is a permanent income which has a standard stable permanent consumption out of it. There's also a transitory income which will deviate your actual income levels from the permanent income to some levels. So usually higher for a higher income group and lower for a lower income group, but they will still continue to consume the level of consumption as permanent and not more or less. Transitory component will cancel out, which will give you a short run consumption function which looks like the Keynesian consumption function. Okay, so for a cross-section data, you can still have MPC less than APC. Now the same analysis we will do for across time series, right? So long run, again, for the time series bit, long run average consumption is a function of permanent consumption is a function of permanent income. So this is easy to understand. And this is a short run consumption function in time, if in case it's a good year. So in this case, now the movement from a point which is to the right is not a section of population, but a good year or a bad year. So if it's a good year, let's say, if it's a good year and your income level is higher than your regular income level, if it's a boom year, so your income can increase, but your consumption remains the same logic. So you come on this point. And it's a bad year, your income will fall, but your consumption stays the same. So it is this point, and you're back to the short-run consumption function, Keynesian short-run consumption function, which has MPC is less than APC. And in the long run, of course, so this is for the short run. So this is one consumption function. As income levels on average go up, this consumption function can go up, and the long run consumption function is along this line, which shows the long run consumption function, which is a fixed fraction of the long run income. Okay, so this is pretty similar to what the life cycle hypothesis also was. So yes, so this is Friedman's permanent income hypothesis. Of course, there are question marks. There are things. So one biggest thing is that how do you really calculate this permanent and transitory component? Like if you watched my video on the Modigliani model, so it was a model. What he gave was something which can be calculated empirically. So it was a model which gave fixed numbers, which gave proper numbers, which could be empirically calculated. With permanent income hypothesis, this transitory component and permanent component, it is very difficult to find the two and then make predictions. So predictions wise, it's a little difficult model to kind of work with. In terms of similarities with the life cycle hypothesis, so life cycle hypothesis says that across a lifetime you will have your early years where you will earn less and you will save less. Then you'll have a middle years when you'll earn more and save more. And then when you have your, end years where you will again earn less and spend more. So he can call this, you can call this as, the point where your transitory income is positive, and this point would be where your transitory income is negative. So that is how you can kind of find a common ground between the two, because the conclusions are very similar, and also the fact that both of them use present value as a determinant of consumption. So this is about Milton Friedman's permanent income hypothesis. So and next we will go to Dusan-Curie's relative income hypothesis. Watch out for that.